All right, good morning. Good morning, almost, still morning yet. Thank you to Ed, Nancy, Jim for letting me speak today. Believe it or not, I requested to speak and very soon after started regretting it because I get nervous doing this stuff. So, but it's a topic, the topic you see on the screen, air traffic at our DZs, and it's a topic that I feel is obviously very important enough to request to speak to a bunch of drop zone owners when I'm not a drop zone owner and I can't relate to the many things that you guys experience. But I hope in this short or relatively short discussion that we'll ask ourselves the question, are we managing our air traffic effectively? Because I believe we're on the cusp of a very changing sport where we're starting to use more airspace than we ever have before. And I know that many of us in this room are dealing with it on a routine basis, but I'm not sure that information, that knowledge has trickled down to the smaller DZs so that we're all speaking the same language. So I'm not going to speak about, or I don't intend to speak about aircraft traffic. It's not about jump plane traffic or recreational aircraft in the drop zone airspace. Also not about canopy traffic. As Ed mentioned, I'm not here to speak about that, so I hate to disappoint you. I did a seminar last year at the Expo on canopy traffic, and it's a whole separate ball of wax. Obviously, it's an issue. It's something that we need to, or have been for years now, trying to take control of in our sport and manage better. And honestly, some of the same solutions that are being applied in the canopy world can also be applied in the free fall world or in the overall air traffic of the DZ. So everything from exit, you might think of exit down to pattern altitude, everything in between. And quickly, just looking at the last few decades, the airspace consumption as we know it. And I know I'm speaking to a big group. I tried to imagine who all the different DZOs that I know, who I would be speaking to, but largely, if you're a DZO, then you're like me and you're on the other side of the hill. Yep, so you've been scouting for 10, 20 years, and you're moving on now to a management position where you're providing this avenue for jumpers. This is something that you love. But what comes with that is often our finger isn't on the pulse as sharply as it used to be. We're not in it, we're not jumping every day, so we don't always relate, and even though we think we do, yeah? So just want us to be aware of that. And as I quickly run through the last few decades and think of free-falling discipline, it's largely been FS, classic style perhaps, still popular in a lot of the military competitions. Classic style, FS, 4, 8, 10, 20 ways. Big blocks, 100 ways, up to, what is it now, 400 way world record. Free flying has been around now for almost 20 years. And certainly has taken all different shapes and sizes. And then you have tracking as a discipline. But other than tracking, most of these disciplines as we perceive them, justifiably, are falling straight down columns of air. So just a very rough image here to get us on the same page that I'm on. And that is that we've been conditioned to believe that most skydives just happen in successive columns of air. So, and that brings up the whole exit order debate you've seen many articles on and heard discussions on over the years about who should exit first and last. And I think we've arrived at a fairly common or agreed upon SOP in that regard, meaning without getting into that discussion, that like the bigger groups exit before the smaller groups, the faster falling groups, or maybe it's different at different DZs, right? But the slower falling groups exit before the faster falling groups. And that's the generally agreed upon principle, with the trump card being perhaps deployment altitude. So if you're opening high, you get out in the back of the plane. If you're opening low, super low, Scotty Carbone, he's not in here anymore, then you get out in the front of the plane. So that's skydiving as we've known it. And then I just wanted to quickly touch on skydiving as it is starting to happen today, and maybe bring up some of the new disciplines so we can think about that in relation to airspace consumption. And if I think quickly, if I think about freefall, in the last 5 years, there's been such an evolution, and probably because of tunnels that came around in the late 90s. I think it was the Orlando tunnel, 97 or so. And now we're seeing a huge proliferation of tunnels all blanketing the globe, pretty much. And the skill level is starting to catch up. So the baseline skill level around the world is higher than you and I realize it is. With that evolution, we're seeing these new disciplines, and perhaps the biggest discipline, and almost what I was thought of making a topic of this conversation, is the new discipline of angle flying, or tracking. And you might have heard it referred to as tracing, or almanati, whatever the name. The point is that now jumpers, on a routine basis, in groups of all sizes, are consuming the airspace in a much greater way. And I think it's time that we add that to the equation. So the image that comes, and let me just say that I don't even know the right words, I can't overemphasize the level of proficiency that these tracking groups are bringing to the table. So now you're having groups of 5, 10, 20, 30 jumpers all staying together, very close, very tight, changing angles, changing directions, changing speeds throughout, and get this, staying together, staying in tight proximity the whole time. I don't even have an image for it. The image that comes to my mind is a flock of birds, and this is a really poor image of that. If you think of like the cave swallows, the V-tail swallows, or if you think of, I looked it up the other day for this photo, there's a group of birds, I think they're called starlings, maybe English bird, and they fly, I mean, they're like a swarm of bees, they're so tight, right? And that's probably a little bit of an exaggeration of what's happening in the tracking world, but it's certainly where we're headed, and we're certainly very quickly moving in that direction. So probably a more accurate picture is this, and this was taken this month in Eloy, so this is a very relevant, very current skydive. In fact, somebody out there might see themselves on here. Rook. But this is very accurate, and I'm going to keep talking. I'm going to leave this up for a few minutes and just talk through some other things. But while you're looking at it, just pay attention to the horizon, for example, and the angle at which these guys are flying, because it's not just a flat track. It's not head down, is it? If it's head down, all 30 of them are doing a poor job. And they're doing a poor job together. So a big part of this whole presentation to me is that we're seeing a paradigm shift. And we can either get ahead of it, we can choose to get ahead of it now and start planning and talking and setting guidelines, or we can lag behind and wait for accidents to start happening. That's it. That's the end of my presentation. Yeah, so I just made the note here that we're no longer following. And that's how I started thinking of it for the rest of the presentation, really, is that now it's more about, we have falling groups of using the airspace in a falling manner. And that's largely what skydiving has been for 30 years, right? Free falling. And now we have groups that are using it in a flying manner. So actually flying through the sky. And it's a little bit more than free flying. In fact, it's a completely new discipline, as I mentioned. And then just a good example, I think, or an example, it's not necessarily a good one, but a proficient angle flyer or a proficient tracker these days might aim to stay in the air for 90 seconds or more. And that's pretty much equivalent to an intermediate wingsuiter, I think. I mean, I can remember when I was wingsuiting, that if I could get a minute and a half, I was pretty happy. And I know that segues perfectly into the wingsuiting discipline, because it also has evolved very quickly. And now, I know we've all seen it, but wingsuiting has just taken off to the moon. And now we're flying for tremendous amounts of hang time, tremendous amounts of space, and still landing off to DZ. How's that? Yeah. So, and there's a video, just a little side note, there's a video called Dreamlines 4. It's by Robert Pechnik, or he had it made. You guys remember Robert? He started the Birdman suit with Yari back in the mid-90s, and he just made a very high quality, or had a very high quality video made of proximity flight, and it's unlike any that you've seen on the internet. It's in the Swiss Alps, but it's with helicopter cams and everything else, and it truly embodies the human flight and where we're going, and it shows that we're becoming little airplanes. I mean, we're little jets flying through the sky. And it also shows that we're really just falling in a very, very controlled way. But at the end of the day, we're moving through space. All right, and then finally, if we survive the big blue sky from exit to opening, then we still have to survive the canopy portion of the jump. Separate seminar, separate discussion, but I do want to just touch on some of the new disciplines. Obviously, there's swooping. Swooping started I don't even know, late 90s as well, where it really started to take off. Early last decade, it became a competitive sport. We've seen material improvements, design improvements that have, also skyrocketed, and the skill has matched. And then we've seen a divergence in a way of competitive swooping, the guy who gets out at 5,000 feet on every single jump, and that pretty much spends his career doing that. And you see people, AFF instructors, video, free fly, tracking, whatever discipline you want, opening their small wings, sub 100 square foot wings, and swooping on any given load. So consuming the airspace perhaps in a little bit less predictable way. And then one last canopy discipline, kind of a canopy discipline, it's high performance canopy flocking, and we can really just push it to the side for now. It's crew. It's no contact crew. As far as its airspace consumption, the way that it uses airspace, it's a lot like crew. So many times getting out short or downwind of the drop zone, opening immediately at 13,000 feet, and flying back towards the drop zone. Usually using a different airspace than the free fall drops. And lastly, if we didn't see it coming, there's XRW. Do you guys, is Vladi in this room? Vladi, I was waiting for this moment. He's not here, but I think it was like also in the late 90s when Yari and Vladi made the first two-way dock, the wingsuit and canopy dock, and it was probably like half a second photograph, and it wasn't quite as big as the current high altitude by Felix Baumgartner, but it was something that we heard all over the world. And now, honestly, every drop zone I go to, it's not like there's XRW happening all day wherever you go. But you run into friends almost everywhere you go that say, hey, guess what? Next weekend, so-and-so and I are going to go do some XRW, or they just came off a weekend of doing it. So it's happening, and if we see it on the videos and we see it around, then we know more and more people are going to start doing that. And we need to take it into account. Why does all this matter? I mean, I think it's obvious. It's about air traffic. And the whole point for me, and the reason that I wanted to talk, is just because we're using airspace now in a much greater way. If you look at an aerial map, we're using the entire aerial map on any given load, regardless of the wind or the spot direction or the jump run direction. We're using much more of the airspace, often in unpredictable ways. How many people have ever opened somewhere completely different than where you expected? And you can be shy with that if you want to. I know we're at a drop zone owners conference, and you're not sure some of the jumpers are sitting in the back. But at the end of the day, I mean, I've had two in the last 6 months that I can think of, where I opened and it either got disoriented or engrossed in the jump, or trusted the person I was following, and also just don't have the ability to do this new discipline of tracking or angle flying, and opened and was completely in a different place. Couldn't even figure out where I was initially. Other times, upline of flight underneath another group because of clouds or whatever. So I think we can all relate. And I just wanted to say that if we don't get ahead of the curve, and start talking now, start coming up with solutions and guidelines, then we're going to see accidents happen. And yeah, I'm not a skeptic, I'm not a psychic. I've just been to a lot of places, and I think the average skill level is rising so quickly that it's something that we need to be aware of. My notes are failing me here, so. Okay, so the airspace problem. Yes, I just came up with this very rough picture It doesn't do it justice, quite honestly. All this shows is, more than anything else, it shows that you've got 5 or 6 groups here getting out in order, but no longer are we falling down those columns of air. And I know for years we've had groups that are tracking or actually moving in space, a wingsuiter here and there. But now the point is that on a 20-man Otter or a 6-man Cessna, whatever it may be, you might have a higher percentage of people that are moving off the line of flight, and that's what I'm trying to stress here today. The other thing to notice here is that it doesn't account for any hay-ho activity or any high altitude, high opening canopy activity. So this doesn't account for crew, high performance flocking, XRW, any of that stuff. You add that in there and it might actually make this whole space turn orange. Yeah. But it does demonstrate that we're no longer falling straight down through the air. So what I've done is I've taken just a very random sample otter load here, 22 jumpers I think it is, and I've just made a hodgepodge of activity. Sometimes I'm in the land, I promise you, I'm not there a lot actually, but I'll go in for a day and I'll go make a jump. 22 jumpers, there might be like 10 or even more than 10 disciplines happening on that otter load. And it scares me. It scares me to death. And I'm like, because I know as I look at the group that no one in that load is taking responsibility for what these different groups are doing. And quite often we get to close the jump run and the whispering starts happening. Hey, what are you doing? Oh, you know, over prop noise and earplugs and everything else, looking over your back to the guy in the front of the plane. All kind of communication, serious communication is being attempted over a serious topic in a very poor manner. So this is just a sample otter load, and I think more than anything I just wanted to demonstrate that it's chaos and we need to put some management to it. Certainly opportunity for air traffic. And then I asked the question, how are we using our airspace? The same thing I asked at the beginning, are we managing it safely and effectively with the relevant procedures that we have today? So it is the size of the group and the opening altitude, are those the biggest factors anymore? And I don't have an answer for that, but I'm not certain that they are. I read a book recently by Lawrence Gonzalez called Deep Survival, if maybe you've read it. But he was an editor for National Geographic Adventurer magazine for like 20 years. And Robert writes, the word, I'm going to read my finer print. The word experienced often refers to someone who's gotten away with doing the wrong thing more frequently than you have. And it's become, that was about 4 years ago I read it, it's become one of my favorite quotes. Because to me it says experience, which I feel like I have a lot of, experience equals success at doing the wrong thing. Yeah? Or it can mean that. He goes on to say, if you've tallied a lot of experience in dangerous, iffy environments without significant calamity, the mental path of least resistance is to assume it was your skill and savvy that told the tale. And he finishes it off by saying, and when the environment changes, your own experience might be inappropriate. And I just wanted to say, guess what? Our environment has changed. Yep. So it's time for all of us in this room, if we're the leaders, if we're the DZOs, to realize that just because we're sitting here alive doesn't mean we've always been doing things the right way. Yep. So who does it affect? Like, that was the next line of thought for me was, I'm going to say this, you know, side note, you ever try to imagine who you're going to be talking to so you're not too distracted when you see Melanie or when you see faces and you're like, oh, this is causing me to brain lock. The same thing for me is I just imagine who I'd be talking to, and I imagine that a lot of you own Cessna DZs, 4-person aircraft, not turbine aircraft. And if that's the case, it's very easy to sit there and feel exempt from a lot of these things. And that would be my next question. Am I, as a Cessna DZO, am I exempt? Hopefully, all of us have had a chance in our skydiving careers to get around to some of the bigger DZs and realize that none of us are exempt. Because sooner or later, our jumpers are going to want to go there and there and there and do these things. And that even though your jumpers are a small fish in a small pond, I can tell you firsthand that a lot of the big ponds have small fish too, yeah? So just like I told you that DeLand otter load, 22 people just single file, like lemmings getting on the plane, are expecting that, wow, we're in a big pond, they know what they're doing here. They know how things run, they've got it under control, and that's not always the case. At the Cessna DZs, it only takes one occurrence. So it only takes the random wingsuiter, the free flyer, the guy who's trying to learn to fly on his head. He's solo, he has no relative perspective. I don't know if you remember what that's like, or if you've ever tried it, but the horizon isn't the best perspective for trying to keep on your head. And you may not realize it, but you're drifting and covering a lot of ground. So before you know it, you get open under a tandem or under a free fall group, and bad things happen. So if we're going to stay lucky, as Lawrence Gonzalez said, if we're going to stay lucky, my big conclusion is that we need to start communicating. We need to start speaking the same language in all the ponds, the big ponds and the small ponds, and not feel exempt. Blah, 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 blah. So basically all these disciplines are here to stay. We need to address the airspace, yeah? And then I want to tell you a quick little side note story that in preparing for this presentation, have I been talking for 30 minutes? No. In preparing for this presentation, I went to Sebastian. They were having a flight camp a few weeks ago. And the flight camp is becoming more popular. They've had it in Sebastian a couple times. Eloy, that picture I showed you, I think this summer in Montreal. And it's angle flying, mostly. And it's groups of angle flyers. There were over 100 people registered, but there were 12 organizers from all over the world. Some of your top free flyers from all over the world. And I just wanted to go because for months I've been stewing on this topic, thinking this is an important, relevant topic. But I wasn't sure if it was just me in my tunnel thinking, oh, this is good, and everybody out there going, that's not really worth listening to. So I went there mainly for that validation, but also to hopefully hear some of their problems and solutions. And that's what I did. First of all, at the end of a long, hot day with beer in hand and jumpsuits still on, these guys volunteered to stay in a room with me for over an hour. So that immediately validated the topic, along with the fact that they would never shut up and let me talk, which is kind of what I wanted anyway. But the next thing is I came away with some solutions, or not solutions, but some suggestions. And all I try to do is collate all the different feedback and the different languages or the different dialects, English dialects, and try to put those together. The first one is just more awareness. Awareness is pretty obvious, but I thought it was a good one to mention in this room once again, because we're a different generation and many of us haven't tried some of these things, so we can't relate in a first-hand way what it's like to be unable to stay with another person who's tracking. I can tell you right now that I thought I was a good tracker. Yep. By old standards, I'm tall, I'm thin, and I can move, but it's not the same today. It's really, really different. So hear me on that, and if you can, get out and try it. If you can't get out and try it, then be open and objective enough to listen to people who are out there doing it on a regular basis, and to realize, even from here today, if you're so inspired or whatever by this today, like, know that the sport is changing drastically. And so listen to those little kids who don't know a hill of beans about anything. They have 100 jumps. They're probably flying with some guys that actually have learned some things. So try it and discuss it, and then the next thing is education. Next thing is education, and that's just quickly touching on passing along the information. So I was in a room with 12 organizers from around the world, you know, Spanish, Italian, and American, and Venezuelan, and all these guys are going everywhere. They're rock stars in our sport, going everywhere, doing this every week. And they're learning the nuances of how to lead a group through the sky and take that group along the right swath and opening up in the right location where they say they're going to open up. Even if you can track really well, if you haven't had that experience of leading a group through all these different angles and speeds and everything else, then you'll quickly find out that you're going to open, like I said earlier, in a place you didn't expect. And that's not only dangerous for you and your spot, that's dangerous for the other groups in the load. not ending up where you said you would be. So passing along that information, and probably one of the bigger ones, and I'm going to dwell on this for a second, is just better information systems. So each of you out there who have had drop zones for 20 years and you've got all these things, we've got to get better information out there. We've got to get aerial maps. We've got to get all the basic things: winds, walls, deployment sectors, aerial maps. Let's just go back to that. Aerial map that shows not only where the big landmarks are, but it needs to be up to date. I've seen so many maps where people are like, oh yeah, well that field isn't there anymore. It's a neighborhood. You know, or well now there's a pond there that they've made, or now there's a big highway with power lines, those kinds of things. So up-to-date aerial maps. Some of you are laughing. And then a lot of times the aerial, it's on the back of the bathroom wall or somewhere less conspicuous. It's not there for you to see. And if they do have an up-to-date aerial map and it's not there, you have to go ask Manifest for it, and it's in a drawer if you should so care to find out what's up, what the ground looks like from above. When we were falling straight down columns of air, it was less of an issue, but now it's becoming more of an issue. Winds. For 5 years now, winds have been a big topic for canopy flying, but now as we can traverse the sky and open in any sector, aren't winds more important for everyone? Don't we need to know what the layers are all the way down? Again, I've seen mixed results with that. Some drop zones posting them in the boarding area, some you have to ask to get the information. Nowadays we all have iPhones. You can probably find an app that has it. I use an app for it. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Walls. We use a great thing in DeLand, because DeLand, as big as it is, it's a very congested airport, and we do a lot of high altitude canopy work. So we coordinate with the pilot, the drop zone management, Manifest, and Flight 1, and we have big imaginary walls on the maps. So depending on the spot and the free fall jump run, the pilot knows where that wall is, and we've actually made it a double wall. So there's a buffer zone there for error. But the free fall spot stays to one side, the canopies stay to another. And that's a new responsibility of the leader of some of these canopy jumps. Deployment sectors is, to me, one of the biggest suggestions that came from that meeting. And that is, like I had the little orange, the slide of the flight paths of the different groups, and it wasn't indicated as well, but having like deployment sectors. So yeah, I mean, there's so many different combinations or possibilities, but designating areas where different groups are going to fly to and where they're going to open. And then holding jumpers responsible for taking their groups there. And then lastly, in the better information systems, we just need adaptability. All of us here to start, my note to myself is to start thinking of it as faller flyer, faller flyer, faller flyer. Those are the bigger categories that help me to separate how we should organize our loads. We need to be able to trust that the load organizer has all of this information that I just described, and that he is able to take us to that deployment sector in an accurate way. Okay, lastly, two more. Improved communication, and that's mostly about terminology. So if you're free flying, free fly. If you're tracking, track. But right now, because the tracking discipline or the angle flying is becoming a new discipline, then you often get jumpers on those that say, hey, I'm free flying, and they're fully intending on tracking through the sky. Or the other way around, they're tracking and they call it free flying. So it's a matter of communication between the groups as well, that we're speaking the same language. And include the pilot. I think that's the last one. No, include the pilot. So let's get the pilot involved. Dave, you guys know Dave Schwartz. He flies for Roop, and he's down in Sebastian a lot. He joined us on this meeting, and he listened mostly, but he had some really good points about pilot things. But it's very important to include the pilot so the pilot knows what we're doing. I have a quick side note. How am I on time? Good. I have a quick side note recently, and I wasn't going to tell this if I didn't have time, and I don't know if I do, but I was doing a two-way tracking jump recently in DeLand, and this is about having the pilot involved. And we knew which way the jump run was to be, and the winds were to the southeast, which is like, if you land off there, you're going to land somewhere really bad, you know, like in the forest or the highway or something. So we had planned to get out, track offline of flight, and then downwind of jump run back toward the airport. Well, the next two-way right behind us was tracking, getting out, offline of flight, and upwind, further out over those woods. Without getting into details, we experienced clouds in the plane. So he had to circle for 10 minutes or so. And several times he turned the red light on as if he was setting up for jump run in a completely different direction than what we had planned. And it was a big deal actually, because we were like red lights on, and immediately we start scrambling for a new plan on jump run. You know, like, okay, we're gonna go out and then go up. You goes out and go back. And it got all chaotic, and then the light went off. And it was like, oh, shit. Okay, and you can bet the other 15 jumpers on the plane are all looking at us like, oh God, they don't even know what they're doing. Are they gonna be under us? You know, how's the airspace gonna be? Well, it went around, the red light came back on, and now we're pointed in a third direction. And so immediately we start scrambling for what are we gonna do? And all the while I'm kind of thinking of this seminar actually, because it's coming up, and I'm like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, I don't have an ending to that, except to say we've got to get the pilots involved. The pilots have to be speaking the same language and have to be involved in this bigger system. Okay, and then the one that I put on there, this indirectly came from them, and I know we're not all going to like it, but I think it's time for air traffic control. And I'm not talking about the tower and the tower on your airport or whatever it is, but I'm talking about relative to the size of your drop zone or proportionate to the activity that's happening there that week or that year, that we set up a better system that will manage this process. And I'm trying to be general and vague with that because I know it's not fair to say to assess the DZO that you have to have somebody standing out there all day with a clipboard and that's all his job is. That's completely unrealistic. But I do believe we need to have people in charge. People that are facilitating. That 10 different groups on the otter that I was describing, somebody should be there. It's got to have the land, of all places, big drop zone. I'm only being all bold because I know Bob and Mike aren't here, right? But it is on video. But somebody should be there out in the loading area, even if it's not a boogie, somebody should be there making sure that people are talking. Or there should be other things in place that bridge that gap. All right, almost done. So, what are the components of an effective system? I'll try to be quicker with this one. Number one, load activity. Something that shows load activity or gives load activity and the flight paths and deployment sectors. I don't even know if I put that. The flight paths and deployment sectors of the different groups. You guys, I don't have the solutions. I'm trying to get us on the same page and start talking the right solutions. So please don't look at me as, that won't work for us. Sorry. Like, take it and tweak it and change it and make it work for you. But we need to have this information. I need to see something more than a sheet that has a list of names. And maybe says over here that they're on a four-way team or part of a free flag group. I need to know a little bit more so that we're thinking this group's going here, this group's going here, this group's going down. Yeah? Also, we need to have environment. These are things I've already touched on, but we need to have DZ constraints, no-fly zones, all of this on the aerial photograph. It needs to be there. And I can think of examples. I mean, I know in Paris, man, they have a beautiful map, and it's inviting. It's awesome. Like, and Eloy is doing the same thing at the boarding area. They have all of this information that I'm about to go over. So they're kind of setting the trend and have been doing it. But we all need to do it. And that's how I think of it. It needs to strike curiosity in the jumpers. So if I don't care what the winds are, you know, it's a no-wind day, there's 3 groups in the plane, I could care less. But I walk by this thing, I should be like, wow, I wonder what this is. Like, it's got colored areas. You don't fly here, you do fly here, we expect you to land here. All of that stuff should tell you the winds. You should want to find out the winds even though you don't need them. Talk too much. And then the weather. Just talked about it. Winds, uppers, lowers, and middles, I'm calling them, but everything in between, right? There's so many different places to get the winds. And then communication with the jump pilots. I've already talked about that. So, quickly, some questions that I would ask myself if I were you, and these are also very high level. But number one, am I using some form of air traffic control? That's what I would walk away with now, is what am I doing to provide this information? Or what am I doing to strike curiosity in my jumpers and maybe help educate them and get them involved now, get them interested? If not, how can I implement such a system? If yes, how can I improve my system? And then I think last I have, are all jumpers, load organizers, and jump pilots aware of the system? Same thing, try to invite curiosity, encourage, now I'm reading. I just encourage you guys to do it better. So take what you've got and make it better. I don't know if you can do that in Paris, it's fantastic, love it. But the minute you start thinking you can't do it better is when it starts leveling off, right? All right, I've taken that same sample otter load and I've just organized it. So now I'm thinking more, instead about group size, I'm thinking about flying, falling, flying, falling, 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 falling. So these groups, man, there could be a million scenarios, right? And I've just thrown one up there, very random, same one we looked at earlier. And I've just put it in order and it's going to look something like this. Again, very generic, very first look at this kind of stuff. But basically, the first group got out of the plane, flew off line of flight and then upwind. Second group fell straight down, off line of flight, and then down, 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 down. And there's no problem with 4 successive groups getting out that are falling straight down. But what it made me say, immediately I looked at that and I said, you know what, if I think just a little bit differently, I could change the order such that the first group out is falling, and then flying, falling, just alternate, and it would shift one layer of insulation between the groups. So you'll see, you'd have 3 falling straight down instead of 4 at the end. Blah, 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 blah. All right, so it looks like this. And all that's done is just put a little bit more insulation in the space. So you have falling, flying, falling, flying, and then 3, instead of 4, you have 3 successive groups falling. Yep. Okay, in conclusion, you guys, I'm going to read. Skydiving is evolving at an exponential pace. Duh. We're no longer falling straight down. We're traveling across the sky. We're starting to fly. We're almost flying. We landed a wingsuit last year, right? As a result, airspace requirements are increasing drastically, and we're becoming more like aircraft. And that was what I used to say in the canopy, because that's a big part of the seminar. Like, don't even get me started, but it's just crazy the chaos that happens in the landing area, right? Well, it's the same now in the sky. We're all over the place. From the exit to the landing, we are all over the sky, and yet it's just free range. It's just free range. Do what you want to do and get there safely. Our technology and our skills have far surpassed our traffic regulations. And then the last 2 things, every jumper should have the opportunity for a controlled deployment. That's what we're trying to set up with air traffic, right? With air traffic control. And finally, every jumper with a good canopy should live to see another day. Thank you.